Captain Whitehall, Company D, 2nd United States Sharpshooters. Today's video we're going to be constructing the body of our Schuylkill Arsenal fatigue blouse for Private White. Now, we already have the sleeves done up and the body done up in 2 other previous videos, and in the intro video we talked about the lining. Just a quick note on the lining. I absolutely love Wambaugh White & Company's fatigue blouse lining. It is always a different pattern every time I've done one of these coats, and the fact that it is always this cool wool cotton mixture, it always has some amazing pattern. I really cannot rave about these enough. These are fantastic coat linings that they have, and they're actually not too far off from original pictures of fatigue blouse linings, and they're actually 2-spec with a wool and cotton content that was required by the Quartermaster Department during the Civil War. So, getting into the actual construction of this body of the lining, we are now on step 23, which is pin the lining body to itself at the shoulders and close using a 3/8 inch seam and press open. What does all that mean? Quite simple. We're going to set our instructions aside, and we have a little bit of a backwards kind of assembly portion right now. So we are going to move to the shoulder seam. You can find your shoulder seam by this huge hole right here. Obviously this is where the arm is going to be going through when this is sewn up to the coat. Right now we are actually holding and touching the right side. This is going to be the side that's up against your chest, your sides, your back, and will be to open view. So essentially what we're going to want to do is fold over this half to the wrong side. So now we have right sides touching, and we will be pinning this seam right here. So we will pin this, we'll mark it with a 3/8 inch seam, we'll sew it with a very tight back stitch, because again it's a shoulder seam. It's going to have a lot of strain and pulling put onto it, just because obviously it's a shoulder seam. You're going to be moving your arms, carrying your pack, your haversack, your canteen, things with a lot of weight that really do put a lot of stress on fabric. It's just one of those facts. So once this is all pinned up and sewn, we're going to do the exact same thing to this side. We're going to, helps if I get my pins out of the way, going to do the same thing. Fold it over, 3/8 inch seam. We're going to sew it. We're going to press these open so they lay flat up against the shoulder. And from there, we're going to continue on with sewing up a few other little portions of our lining before it actually goes into the coat. But before we get into any of that and I start rambling on more, I'm going to pin these up. I'm going to sew one side and press it just so there's a varying degree of what it should look like versus what it looks like in the prep stages, just so if you are sewing one of these coats yourself or thinking of sewing it, just for the aid of instruction, you will have everything right here for you, just for a comparison. And, you know, am I doing this right? Am I not doing this right? Something I didn't really have when I first started constructing my very first fatigue blouse. So I'm going to get all that done and we will be right back. All right, and here we have basically our half and half are ready to sew and are already sewn. Shoulder portions of our sleeve lining. So again, let's just say 3/8 inch seam, pinned together. We're going to use a fairly strong back stitch. And then over here we have the 3/8 inch seam strongly back with a strong back stitch and pressed open. Pulling back, you can really tell the outline of the coat and how this is supposed to fit inside of your coat. This is really where personally, I think the coat really starts to take a life of its own is when the lining gets put in, but we're not quite there yet. We have just this to sew and one more step. I did want to do this portion kind of midway through and talk about the lining as itself. It is a fairly open material. You can see the very faint see-through of my finger kind of moving back and forth. That can be a little bit of an issue getting a tight stitch with sewing this material, especially towards the edges. As you can tell, the edges do fray. There's really nothing you can do. It's just one of those facts that it is a multi-threaded, as you can tell just with all the different checkerings and the different colors of thread, that it is a multi-thread thing, not thing, but piece, I should say, or cloth. So it will fray on the edges a little bit, but that's fine. You're really not going to have any rough edges on this coat, really, so to speak. Just near the edges, definitely take your time of getting your stitches started. I do the whole little loop stitch, so using one of my pins here to kind of show, I'll start near the edge, I'll go through, pull it through, and I'll loop it back through again, just so since it's fairly open, my knot that I tie in the end of my thread doesn't actually pop through, and I'm there trying to do it all over again. So just a little loop, and just take your time and just work your needle, back and forth with that back stitch. So anyways, I'm going to get this sewn up, and we're going to start on the next part, which is step 24 of getting our fatigue blouse done. Okay, and now that we are back with our shoulder seams sewn and pressed open, we're going to move on to the next step, which is going to be step 24. We're going to double roll the lining front on the wrong side 1/4 of an inch, 6 inches down from the top left front only. This is going to be the pocket. So, what does that mean? Well, we're holding the coat like this. So if it was being worn, this is our left side. So we're gonna turn it this way. So technically it's technically stage right, so to speak. And we're going to completely flip it over. So we have the wrong side facing us. Best way to tell, shoulder seam. And we're just gonna plop this lining out. So, to start with, as I bump the camera all over the place, we need to start our pocket approximately 6 inches down from the top. Luckily, we have a 6-inch ruler. So we're just going to place that all the way down here. Take our chalk mark and put a very, very stout line. And now our pocket is going to be 7 inches from this line down. So we're just going to mark 6. Can use my thumb as a gauge without screwing this up. And we're going to go 1 more inch and draw the line, so to speak. Well, quite literally, actually. Right there. With every project, everyone has their least favorite part. For me, it's dealing with the lining. That is my least favorite part. Mainly just because it likes to not hold when I'm trying to pin it in place, and so I'm always trying to fiddle, and it starts coming loose down here while I'm all the way up here, so I have to go all the way down here, and while I'm down here, it's unraveling up here. So I always try to get this done as quickly and as painlessly as possible. So we're going to double roll very quickly, just this little portion, and then once it is sewn in place with a tight running stitch down, we are going to press the ever-loving life out of this lining. My iron usually does fairly well with this stuff on the max setting, which is pretty much set for linen, which this stuff is a cotton wool blend, and cotton and wool are a little more delicate than linen is. So the fact that this stuff takes linen kind of shows how stout and how much of a pain in the neck this stuff can be, but it could be a whole lot worse. The more I deal with these kits, the better I'm getting, so, and it's all being self-taught, so I really was struggling my first 4 times, so it's this blouse and the last one that I've done that were really the easier ones because I finally learned. But, you know, life is a learning curve, hence what we're doing here with a video on how to sew one of these Schuylkill Arsenal fatigue blouses. We're learning together. I'm learning how to try and do a how-to video and not knock cameras over, and how to speak while doing this. So we're all learning together in this. All right, and pin right there. And as you can see, like right here is my 7-inch mark, and it's already starting to fray out. So we're just going to neatly roll that little guy up. And this is definitely a part that I don't mind kind of taking my time with and showing how to do it properly, mainly because this part is such a royal pain. I'm actually friends with Brian White on Facebook. He and I talk every now and then. And the last time I was actually working on one of these coats, he even confessed his dislike for doing linings. It's one of his least favorite parts as well. I'm glad that a pro, not a novice like myself, is holding the same sentiments towards doing one of these, or at least doing lining, so I don't feel too bad when I'm struggling, and sometimes I just want to light this stuff on fire because it's just absolutely frustrating. But I think that should do, of course, right here. But, you know, I don't mind laughing at myself and showing mistakes. Gotta keep humble. Or at least try to. And you know what? It'll do for now, as long as I can get this sewn up in place for the time being. I'm not gonna cry too much. And since we are going to be stitching this, you just want to make sure that your lines are visible. Also helps if I actually make this viewable to you guys. Okay, so we got our... Okay. Psyching myself out just a little bit on that. Okay, so I'm going to get this pressed, going to get it sewn. I'm going to get the rest of this pressed and sewn, and we'll be right back with the next step, which is going to really make this coat start to come to life, and basically make it the very fancy Schuylkill Arsenal fatigue vest. So we'll be back in just 1 second. Okay, and now that we have our pocket sewn, looks just like that. The material of the lining really kind of makes it difficult to see the stitching, but you can barely see kind of where the puckering is from the line. So now we're going to move to step 25, which is we're going to use the shoulder seams of our lining and the shoulder seams right here of the coat. We're going to match them up, and then we're going to pin this portion of the lining to the collar, basically right here on this seam where the collar and the body attach. So I'll try to get a better angle of this portion. So have our shoulder seam right here. So we're going to line that up as best as we possibly can. Take one of our pins, and since this is going through quite a bit of material, it'll be a little difficult. There we go. Okay, and then we take our other shoulder seam and we pin right there. Just like that. So from here, we just take more of our pins, especially if you can get a grip on them. And we pin through the center seam. And essentially, we follow the rest of the coat and lining out. So we'll do one right here on the corner. We'll do one right here in the middle. I get a little excessive when I'm pinning things in place, mainly just because I don't like things moving around on me. It's kind of a pet peeve of mine, I guess, while I'm sewing. Then we will move on to over here. And we will pin, grab the rest of the body. We'll pin right here in the middle. And we will pin. Unfortunately, it looks like I might have pressed a little too much when I pre-pressed some of this. Or it's just kind of doubled over on itself. That's exactly what happened. Which is fine. It does happen. You just kind of pull it out a little bit and pin. Come on. There we go. Just like that. So now our lining is attached to the coat. So I'll move this, or pull this down a little more, just so we can get a better view of what this all looks like now, which I'm sure the camera does not do this lining and the very rich blue of the coat material justice. This looks absolutely fantastic, and it's not even stitched in yet. So that is what we are dealing with for our fatigue blouse. That looks absolutely awesome. Okay, now that I'm done drooling over a coat and all that, which is I think one of the best jokes ever made about reenactors, and I even say it to my roommates and people at work that I'm around every day, including my boss, who oddly enough is a subscriber. So Nate, if you're watching this, you've heard me say before, but reenacting is the only hobby. We're perfectly well-adjusted adult men who like to talk about fabric. You know, there's nothing wrong with that in the reenacting community. Honestly, there's nothing wrong with that, ever. You know, seamstresses, tailors, you know, they're all walks of life. They're both male and female. There is no issue with that whatsoever. There are some great people out there that do fantastic work. So anyways, now that I'm done drooling, we are going to, help if I get the glare off, we're going to whip stitch this in place. Luckily, the instructions right here show the fantastic detail of how to whip stitch, which essentially is just a coil almost around, and this calls for 2 stitches per inch. I kind of cut that just a little close. I usually do probably 1 stitch an inch instead of 2. Again, personal preference. So I'm going to get this stitched in place, and we'll be right back and moving on to the next step after that. All right, and we are back. Unfortunately, I forgot to hit play on the last time I was doing one of the steps on the coat, so we're gonna kind of have to do a reverse construction in a way to explain what was going on with the lining and attaching it to the coat. So the lining is fully attached and looking absolutely amazing. So on one side, the right hand side, if you were wearing it, is completely overcast stitched into place. Just starting from up along the collar and body seam all the way down to just where it runs at the very end. I try to usually get it onto the very edge of the facing, however, apparently I wasn't really paying attention to where I was going, so it kind of went off just a little bit compared to the other side. It's only 1/4 of an inch difference, and really that's not going to affect much. However, the one step while sewing in the lining that you're really going to want to do is pay attention to your left hand side, because that's the side with your pocket. So if you start all the way up at the collar and go all the way down, you're not going to have a pocket, and you sewed this pocket opening for no reason. So make sure that pocket stays open. So you just stitch from here to here, and then from here down to the bottom. It's just one of those things to be wary of, and you're not gonna really have a pocket, so to speak. You just have the opening for your pocket. That's gonna be in a future step here, working with the body. So now that we're caught up with everything, we're going to be sewing our collar down over the lining. You're basically just going to take the remaining edge of your collar, fold it over by looks about 3/8 of an inch to 1/4 of an inch. Fold that under, press it down. Again, I go insane with the pins. You pin it in place and you sew down this side using a actually does not say, but it appears to be an overcast stitch. So we will use an overcast stitch to stitch this closed. You're going to want some tight stitching. Again, it's the collar. It's going to get some use and abuse, so you want to make sure that it stays attached firmly to your coat. And then after that, we will move on to the next step. Sorry that things kind of got a little bit out of order and things weren't, play wasn't pressed when it should have been, but hopefully this kind of catches everyone up watching this up to speed on what it should be. So I'm going to get this sewn up, and we'll be right back here in just 1 second with our fully attached coat lining minus the sleeves. Alright, and now that we have our collar down, I already pressed it so it would lay flat, just like the collar should lay. Just so you're not getting this, Count Dracula, Count Chocula looking, stand-up collar all the way. So fold it down, pressed in place so it'll learn to kind of hold that shape. So the next step we're going to be doing is sewing bar tacks, which is, if I can get the glare off the picture, these little lines right here and right there. A bar tack is essentially a buttonhole stitch without actually cutting the material open, and you use it as a basically a way to shore up edges of pockets, either trousers, coats, things like that. So we're going to be sewing 2 of those, either 3/4 of an inch to 1 inch long into the body lining. Obviously that's going to be on the left hand side of the coat, and it's going to be right on the opening of our left hand breast pocket for the coat. So I'm going to lift this up and show kind of what to do for that. So don't mind the moving around. If you get motion sickness from this, I'm terribly sorry. Okay. So now that we have, these are kind of already pre-marked, just so I know exactly where it is. Easiest way to find it, you just kind of stick your hand into the, or a finger into the opening of the pocket, and you just mark, and you do the same thing down below and just mark. See if I can get some better lighting on that. It's a little better. So we can do a 3/8 to a 1 inch seam. So a 3/8 would be that long, and of course the inch would just be another 1/4 of an inch longer. I really prefer the 3/8 of an inch just because it's a lot shorter, and I don't usually go out into the lining material itself. I usually kind of cut it half and half. So I usually just kind of find a good little halfway mark and just mark it like that. That way it is in the facing, so it just get a little more strength out of it, which is never a bad thing. And we'll just do the same thing. Right up here. Okay, so now that is done. I'll try and get the best close-up of how to at least start a bar tack I can do. So a bar tack, as I said, is essentially a buttonhole stitch, and this is all sorts wacky doing it this way. So let's go. There we go. So we are going to stitch through one side, and of course you pull your thread all the way through, which is so much fun. And of course doing this through a camera is so easy to do, as I say sarcastically. So you're going to make a loop out of your thread and then come back through the same hole to start. Once that's done, you take some of your thread. Since we have a lot, I'm going to pull it most of the way through until I have this loop. You then take your thread, or your needle, pass it through the loop, and pull up or down. Honestly, personal preference. And that way you get a little knot right here. You then proceed to go to the next closest, close as you can to the last stitch that you made. And then you repeat the process all over again. If I start kind of messing up on words and all that, I'm sorry. It's a little late at night, you know, like 2, 3 in the morning. So I'm pretty much going to be finishing this up and then going to bed. So apologize ahead of time. And once again, just so everyone kind of sees how this is done. As close as you can. Pull most of the thread through the loop. Form the knot, pull it tight. So there you go. It'll look kind of like a mess, especially with all the wax on the thread. It kind of just pools, but eventually you will get it to melt off once you press or iron your facing down. So anyways, I'm going to continue finishing this one and this one off screen, and we will be back with the next step after getting our bar tacks put in, and we'll move on to step 29, which is personally one of my most favorite parts of doing this this kit. So we'll be right back. Okay, so now that our bar tacks are in place, we are actually going to start on step 29, which is making the pocket of the fatigue blouse. This by far is really one of my most favorite parts, because this is really where everything, at least to me, feels like it starts to come together. So the instructions state of our instructions here that the pocket pictured has a 6-inch drop from the bottom bar tack to the bottom. I usually follow the picture in this, and I'm fairly happy with how it turns out. So I usually mark right here at 6 inches where the pocket should start, and I usually just do a line. I should probably have my my ruler here to do this. Otherwise I end up with a wonky line, and no one wants that. So 6 inches down, it is then 6 inches, or excuse me, 7 inches out to the, on the base of the coat, sorry. So just like that. One thing that I kind of just skipped over, I always try to line up the lining of the coat with the arm sky and everything. That way there's no excess material. It isn't left lumpy or gaps on the inside of the lining, kind of like that, so it's nice and flat. The other thing that I do is, and even the instructions say, is to pin around the outline of where your pocket will be. That way it keeps everything nice and taut. The lining doesn't kind of bunch as you're sewing, anything like that, and it overall leaves a far more, just an all-around better look of your coat. The next thing that we're going to be doing, getting ready for this pocket, is above the top bar tack, we need to mark a spot 1 inch above, and that is where our top portion of the pocket will end. So right through here, and I'm going to draw another line down to the edge of our bar tack. That way we know exactly where that needs to end for us. And just need to freshen up the bottom line that we have down here. Off the edge of our bar tack, it was kind of almost in the middle. Okay, so now from here we get to have fun. We get to actually trace our bar tack, or our pocket outline. Why this is so much fun to me, I really don't know. You know, if there's a medical condition for it, it'd be great if someone would explain it to me. But until that happens, I guess I'm just a weirdo like that. But nothing wrong with that. We're all reenactors. We wear wool uniforms and use outdated technology and military tactics and call it fun, so who knows. Anyways, now we're going to draw our line all the way up, and we're going to have a gentle curve like oops. Best part about the chalk, you can always remark where you want to make your lines. That's kind of how I like to have my pockets. Sometimes maybe a little more of a steeper angle, but really whatever works, whatever looks good to you. Personally, I kind of like the look of a narrower, slimmer pocket. It just, to me, seems a little more right, especially when it's really close to the armpit. Unless you want to tickle yourself on the inside of your pocket or something like that, then sure, by all means, go for it. And then I'm just going to outline a little stronger where our pocket will go. The best part too about using chalk with this, if you're not happy with how your pocket looks, you can always redo it. You can wet it down just a little bit. You can rub most of the chalk out and go back at it again until you get that pocket looking how you want. It's like, in fact, I'm gonna come out a little more on this pocket. Like that. There we go. That's something I'm a little more happy with. It kind of has more of a, just a little better profile. Again, it's just one of those things. whatever looks good to your eye. Just because I do it this way, or Dan Wambaugh or Brian White do it one way, or, you know, Nick Sakala, you know, whoever you kind of want to get your goods from, just because they do it one way and you decide to make one of these yourself doesn't mean that you can take a little bit of liberty with it. Because I definitely am with this one. Okay, to me that looks a whole lot better, worlds better to me. So I'm just going to make sure that we're at our 7-inch mark, which we are. And just kind of brush that out a little more. Sometimes with like even marking pencils, they actually come with like a little fan, and you can actually rub these out. But I don't have one of those, so I just got to use that kind of dig at it method, but nothing wrong with that. So anyways, after we get this marked up, we are going to sew the pocket with a tight back stitch from the outside. So basically the neat stitching is going to look outward to the front. So it'll just be that typical how every stitch should look. Really don't know the right term for that right now. But essentially all the line of the stitch, of the back stitch from the back side will be on the inside of the coat, and the neater side will be showing. I guess that's the best way to put it. So I knocked my camera. So once I have the outline of the pocket done, this is when I tend to move my pins in a little closer. That way nothing moves on me whatsoever. I have a very nice tight stitch holding the lining to the coat body. And pull some out of the arm sky. Do a couple of those. Again, I go a little insane with the pins. Granted, it is a pet peeve of mine to have my material moving around on me, so. And yeah, you know what? For good measure, we will do a couple along the downside of our pocket. Another thing to kind of touch on and note with doing the pocket is on some fatigue blouses, you'll actually notice kind of a triangle pattern on the pockets, or kind of a square to really cement the stitching of the pocket in. That can be done. That's definitely not an issue. Sometimes, you know, you'll see one that kind of goes up like this, and then kind of triangulates down, so you kind of have this little design right here. That's completely fine if you want to go that route. Absolutely nothing wrong with that, because I've seen them look like that. Honestly, I kind of like this look. I've never really done it before on any of the fatigue blouses that I've sewn, so, you know, I might actually do that this round. I'm not entirely sure, but I'm going to get this sewn up. We'll see what I decide on doing these, and we will be right back. All right, now we have our pocket sewn, and I actually did settle with going on the triangular sewing pieces up here. But as you can see, the pocket is stitched with a very tight back stitch going all the way up. We do have a little bit of a remnant of our white chalk line. It's just I haven't really cleaned it off just yet. And the inside, the stitching is a little, never mind, there it is. So you can see you have a very nice straight line going all the way down, across, and up. That is where the chalk line really comes in handy, because you can actually mark where your stitches should go, and then you get this very nice, neat, even line, which again is just one of those things of craftsmanship. Again, you really don't have to do that if you want to kind of make a shoddy appearance for your coat, if you want to kind of go that route with some period correct clothing. However, there were standards, oddly enough. Some did kind of slip through the cracks, but for the most part, a lot of stitching was very well done. People knew how to stitch back then in the 1860s. So moving on to the next part is actually the more decorative part of this coat, which is called top stitching. If you put in a Google search for top stitch, you'll find plenty of stuff on machine top stitching. However, top stitching by hand, at least from what I could find, isn't readily available online, especially when I was first looking at how to finish coats. So like what we did on our coat sleeves on the cuff facings, we top stitched 1/4 of an inch around, and it kind of left that very nice thin even line around. Well, now along the body of the coat, except for the bottom, so everything down here does not need to be top stitched because we already have this line from where we hemmed it. However, what needs to be top stitched is the fronts, and this is where this is chalk marked, and I'll get to that in a second. And I already did the collar and the other front to kind of show what it should look like. So the top stitch that calls for the instructions from Wambaugh White & Company is just a tight back stitch. It doesn't really give the stitches per inch. However, I went with fairly tight. You can see the stitching is fairly close together. I would say that's probably 5 to 7 stitches per inch. And I did do the front portion. I like to start my top stitching from the edge of the facing out, down, and around, especially since this collar is supposed to be a little farther back. Really haven't found any issues. The collar will just be a little closer to the front when it's all buttoned, but as I said, it really shouldn't be too much of an issue. So the top stitching for the collar and the front of the coat is a 3/8 inch seam, unlike the cuff edge of the cuff, the vent, the facing, everything like that, which was 1/4. And as you can see, it goes all the way down, around just a little bit, and it actually mates perfectly with the rolled hem of the bottom of the coat. So this one, on the left-hand side, the side with the pocket, is not sewn yet. It is just pre-marked. So we have our 3/4 inch chalk mark line, and again, goes all the way down to where this rolled hem mates perfectly. Like I said, this is more of a decorative stitch than it is a more practical one. It definitely adds a little flair to the coat. Since the sack coat was, or the fatigue blouse was, a kind of a utility garment, it was what you're supposed to wear when you're digging latrines, cutting wood, clearing forest for roads, fatigue detail, essentially. Things that were not soldierly, where you did not have to use the uniform coat or the frock coat, in other words. But they did try to add some style to it just to make it look a little more neat and orderly. So anyways, I'm going to get this top stitched, and after that we'll move into another video on doing buttonholes, where to mark the buttonholes at, and attaching our sleeves. And after that, that actually ends the video series. So I'm gonna get this finished up, and we will see you in the next video. If you like this video, please give it a like, especially if you're planning on doing one of these kits. It'll be a huge help to you, I hope. If you want to see future content on how-tos, how to sew, how to do woodworking projects like what First Sergeant Kep does, or just basic sharpshooter history, please subscribe. Make sure to hit the bell notification. That way you get all the updates that we do our videos. We try to get them out Sunday or Monday once a week. And we look forward to seeing you in the next video. Thank you. Captain Whitehall with Company D, 2nd United States Sharpshooters. Today's video we're going to actually be finishing our Schuylkill Arsenal fatigue blouse. And in doing so, we're first going to be stepping off with Buttonholes. Yes, this is pinned like crazy, as you've already seen in kind of my other videos and that I've openly admitted. I'm a little crazy about pinning. I don't like my material moving around on me. So with buttonholes, especially buttonhole stitching, that is probably one of the most, at least for me and from what I've gathered, one of the hardest skill sets to do while sewing. Some people pick up on it naturally. I still struggle with it. And I've sewn quite a few buttonholes so far. So the instructions for setting up one of these coats for buttonholes is you start with your top buttonhole right by the collar. So you start at 1/2 inch down and in. Yes, this says 1/2 inch here. Because the collar goes up, I go off this point, and my scissors are rattling around like crazy. So 1/2 inch. After that, if your fatigue blouse is under or is at or under a size 42, you're going to space your buttonholes down every 5.5 inches, and they're going to be set in at that 1/2 inch mark. So we got 1/2 inch, 1/2 inch, 1/2 inch, and 1/2 inch in. And they're all 5.5 inches spaced apart. Now, the fun part about this is your buttonholes are 1 inch long. The reason why I have all these crazy markings on the outside, however, are actually, this is where my stitch is going to be. If you put your stitch too close to the actual buttonhole itself, it will actually tear the material out, and your stitch won't have enough tooth really to hold, and you'll just kind of have this flopping piece of material around. So to start off with a buttonhole stitch, let's take a couple of these out. I don't really need those. Okay, that's perfect. So, how do you cut a buttonhole? You have material in between, so you have scissors. Well, scissors will cut all the way through. There are special scissors that have a little dial that actually have the blades right up here with a gap that you can cut your buttonholes with. You can do what I used to do when I didn't know any better on my first couple of blouse kits that I was sewing for myself, and just use a pocket knife and just go nuts and act like Norman Bates and just go nuts on the buttonhole stitch. However, I learned about these guys. Yes, it's a little chisel for buttonholes. I picked this up at a local craft store, sewing store here in Spokane. Everyone seems to go there that sews that I know of here in town. However, this is not 1 full inch, so we will have to kind of space things out. And basically, to cut your buttonhole, you just mark up your line. And I find that using a rubber pad, as I'm dropping everything everywhere, using a rubber pad such as this, this is what I use for my leather working as well. So we'll just pull the stitch out. And you always want to measure twice and cut once. First Sergeant Kep would be very proud of this right now. So we'll just kind of sink that in. When you hear that pop, that means it is punctured through. I'm going to remove my other pin, slant up, guide it over, and again, kind of just wiggle it on down until I hear that satisfying little pop. Just make sure that stays nice and open. Now, yes, I'm sure it'll be very tempting to start playing with the buttonhole and putting the thumb through it or an index finger through to make sure that, you know, oh look, I cut my material open. Yes, that's great. This is about as far as I risk it. You have your lining and you have a lot of threads in here that can actually start fraying open and get caught in your stitching. So now to do the buttonhole stitch, I have my pre-waxed thread. The instructions do recommend doubling up your thread. So yes, this looks like one solid piece, but it's actually two pieces looped over and then tied with a knot on the end. So to start your buttonhole stitch, I prefer to go underneath. And of course, doing this through a camera is oh so pleasant. And I prefer to kind of shore up the far ends. So buttonhole goes through, or the needle goes through. Pull that tight. You then go back through, and this is just like our bar tack. You have a loop, thread goes through the loop, and pull tight until you get a little knot, also known as a purl. And on these end pieces, it's always best to kind of fan your stitch out. So kind of go at a, like say right here is the stitch for the very end. You kind of just do that step by step until you get to these flat runs where I have my holes or my stitching kind of gauged out to where I would like. Let me get another little purl going. And yes, this will look very messy, especially with your wax thread when you're going through and it's kind of melting the wax off the thread going through the material, but fear not, it will turn out just fine. But like I said, I'm also not a buttonhole stitch expert. People like Dan Wambaugh, who helps supplies these kits. Remember reading that he can just zone out, watch a ball game, and sew buttonholes without even looking. I'm not that good. Nor do I claim to be. I just provide mere advice. And just like our bar tack, you want to make sure that you get somewhat close. And I'm going about halfway between our stitch here, or the hole and the stitch line that I marked. It's kind of where I'm really liking it. So just for the sake of instruction, I'll do one more buttonhole stitch here. And after that, I will take it to the off-camera magic and give it the old Martha Stewart treatment and get everything ready. Okay, so as you can see, we kind of have our row of stitching starting to show up. Yes, this is messy. There's wax involved. So I'm going to get this done up and we'll be right back with our 4 buttonholes cut and stitched. Okay, now that we have our fatigue blouse completely top stitched on the collar, the front facings of the coat on both sides, and we have our buttonholes sewn up, and these actually turned out fairly nice. These might actually be some of the nicer buttonholes I've sewn on the coat. We are going to do the sleeves to make our fatigue vest into a fatigue blouse. So to do that, we take our armscye, or armscye, but for layman's terms, it's the armhole. That's basically what it is. And we're going to find the top shoulder seam right here. We're going to set our gauge to 3 inches right here. And we're going to come down 3 inches from that from the shoulder seam to right about here. Make sure you kind of keep a little pinch on it. And we are going to mark with some white chalk right there. And then we're just going to double check to make sure everything lines up, which it does. And we are going to take our sleeve. We're going to take the bottom sew coming from the vent to here. We're going to take this seam, we're going to mate both right sides together, just like that. And this is where I probably go the most insane with my pins, because we're actually going to be pinning this all together for sewing. And we are going to just pin that together. Now, you're probably going to be thinking, well, you know, how is this going to be pinned together like that? Well, luckily, thanks to Corporal Hardway and the sewing knowledge that was passed on to me doing, I believe, my second or third coat doing this, it's actually a lot easier than that. You simply take your armhole here, and you actually pull it like this. You pull the sleeve and the body of the coat upwards into the hole. Now, when you're doing this, you want to make sure that your material is all even and flush together. You might get some waviness, or you might actually have extra material here. You can do several things. What is called easing. Easing is simply the process of bunching the material at a certain height on the sleeve. So one way you can do it is you take needle and thread and you just do a very large running stitch. Not tight or anything, because you're going to take both ends and pull it tight. It'll actually kind of cinch this up at that level, especially if you do it at 3/8 of an inch, which is the seams that we're going to be using on this. And it actually kind of just pulls everything together, makes it a lot easier so you don't have this huge mass of material that's just all kind of wrinkled like that. Another way you can do it is you take both sides and you really pull this one and this one taut together, and that way it kind of eliminates that. You also want to make sure that the lining is also level with all of this. So for instruction's sake, I will kind of go through the first few pins of doing this. So we will line up our two materials of the wool, which is the sleeve and the body. We will then pin in place. And it really just depends which way you want to go with this. We will then get the lining flush. We will get this flush. Grab one of our pins. Pin through. And so on and so forth all the way around the armhole. I will pull these ones out just for the sake of ease for doing the other sleeve, because that one's already pinned, and I will show you guys what the finished product of that looks like when it is all ready to sew. The seam is marked, so it should look something like this. You can see kind of this little kind of ruffle. However, I do have my pins set right below our 3/8 inch of a seam. And as I'm going to be sewing this with a very strong back stitch, this will probably have the most strain, pull, and everything like that on it. I will be pulling the material taut like this and sewing through. That way it eliminates all of this little baconing and puckering down below and should leave it up on top, which is ideally what we want, because it'll be on the inside of the coat and won't show on the outside. So kind of an all-around view. We have multiple pins in place, a very faint chalk line. For some reason the chalk wasn't taking well to the material, which it happens. One thing that I like to do too is kind of trim down these stray fibers. For those who are current or former military, I'm sure you would understand the term of an Irish pennant. So we'll just trim some of those guys down, make it nice and neat so you don't have all this stuff in the way of sewing. Is this necessary? Not at all. Is it helpful? Maybe. Does it help me? Yes. It's kind of the process of elimination here that I'm going by. All right, so we have all that set. I'm going to get this sleeve sewn up. I'm going to get the other one done up, and we'll be right back to show you what the fatigue blouse transformed into, or the fatigue vest transformed into a fatigue blouse looks like. So just 1 second, and we'll be back with a nearly fully finished coat. Okay, and now that we're back, unfortunately, I already got these both sewn without any of the prep stage being recorded because apparently my space on my memory was all taken up from the previous videos and not getting them deleted after uploading. So unfortunately the prep stage wasn't done. However, I can walk us through it. So to prep our sleeve linings, I folded over the lining by about ½ an inch and then pinned in place into the seam allowance of the coat body and the sleeves. So after that, and it's all pinned around, I just did a very tight overcast stitch all the way around. The reason why it's so tight, again, it's just the stress factor, especially right around the armpit and up on the shoulder of the coat. It's just really gonna have a lot of stress put on it. So you wanna make sure that it's a very tight sewn fit. Again, I did the same thing over here. And the best way to get your sleeve linings kind of angled and pinned in place properly is just align the seams to the inside of the sleeve, the body of the sleeve. And after that, it's fairly easy. You just want to make sure that the taller end with the rounded side is up on top and the kind of cut crescent shape is down below. Otherwise, it's going to look really wonky on you. You're going to have to kind of flip it around. The best way I find to actually kind of make sure it gets in line is just fit your hand through the cuff and kind of just pull and straighten through. So kind of like that all the way through. And then you just pull the lining out a lot more, you bend it, you fold it over, you pin it in place, and after that, it's fairly easy. So after you get all that overcast stitched, we're on to the buttons, and then the coat is completely done. So what I do for my buttons is I will kind of pin in place where the coat is, and then I'll just use a marking pencil and kind of just poke through the buttonholes on each part. And that's how I figure where I like my buttons. So I can show you that here in just 1 second once I get this little guy sharpened up. Okay, and now that we have our marking pencil sharpened up, yes, my buttons are already pinned in place and marked, but I can always go over and kind of show the process again. That I don't mind doing for you guys to help you out. So kind of have my mark already. It's always best too that when you get each of your buttons done, you button the coat closed. That way you assure the best possible fit. So I like to line up the bottom of my coat to where it's flared open just a little bit, but not much. Make sure everything's pulled nice and tight, otherwise you'll get like this little pocket crease like that. So make sure that's nice and flat. With your marking pencil, I go to the very far edge and I just kind of twist around, press, make sure it really gets in there. And there should be a mark done. Of course, I was a little off. This is where my pre-done one is. And then just to do the buttons, I go in, I come up just before my line or your mark, depending how you do it, and then put the button, the shank of the button, over the pin. I then press through and all the way through. And there you have a very nice tight fit, just how the button will be once sewn onto the coat. And we'll do the rest all the way up. Make sure our collars roll down. That's kind of one of my biggest pet peeves, is the Dracula collar. And then that is kind of how it should come out looking once everything's pinned. You just want to make sure everything fits nicely. I do kind of like to have a little flared opening on the bottom of my coats for the fatigue blouse. You don't exactly have to do it that way. It's just what I prefer doing. So anyways, I'm going to get these buttons sewn up, and then after that, we are completely done with our coat, and we'll do a recap. Hopefully we can have Private White with us for the first real fitting of the coat. I've worn it just to make sure everything's on the up and up, so to speak. Make sure everything fits properly. So anyways, I'm going to get these buttons all sewn up, and we will be back here in just 1 second. So now that we have our sleeves done on the coat, I'm actually joined by Private White, our newest member of Company D, 2nd United States Sharpshooters, with his newly finished coat. Chandler, first time trying it on, how do you like it?
I love it. I absolutely love it. It's lightweight. You can definitely feel the difference from this to a Sutler Row jacket. The color is magnificent. It feels natural, it feels homemade, feels like someone's put work into it, as compared to my old Sutler Row jacket. It definitely feels like it was off the rack. It's heavy, it's hot. It's
kind of a purple color to it too.
Right, it's got purple color. And you can definitely, there's a lot more love put into this. The interior, it's got this really beautiful personal lining to it. You've got, these deep, deep kidney pockets back down in here. I mean, you look at this and it feels just 10 times better than what you would find, back in one of the Sutler Row tents. I'm just absolutely amazing work, and I'm so glad to have it.
Yeah, these kits, as I've been saying through the whole construction, are a lot of fun. There's definitely parts that will make you scratch your head, but you really do get a greater appreciation for the women and men that actually did make these during the Civil War. And it's really awesome seeing, people buying these and wearing them and really liking them. It definitely adds a whole different level to authenticity when it comes to a sack coat, essentially. And especially since you're coming from, the other side of the Mason-Dixon line to the northern side of the Mason-Dixon line. It's probably a little weird seeing yourself wear blue, I'm sure.
It is. And the thing is, getting this jacket, it's general. I could be infantry. I could do a whole bunch of different impressions with this. It just depends on what's, what color the chevrons are, or, the other minute parts of the impression. However, with my other jacket I had, my shell jacket, I went into the Sutler Row tent. I saw that one has yellow on it. That's going to be cavalry, so that's what I'm going to grab. And I kind of put it on. I didn't have all my other stuff on it, and it fit me. And so I bought it, paid the, the Sutler Row price, and then I went back to my camp, put on my shirt, put on my vest, put everything on, and it was, it was 2 sizes too small. If I wanted it to be comfortable or look good, I would have had to get another size up, or I was going to have to lose 10, 15 pounds.
That's definitely a thing to remember when you're ordering a coat or a coat kit, especially with like a fatigue blouse. It's for fatigue duty. You're going to be out on the battlefield. If you're more of a hardcore, you're going to be digging trenches or rifle pits, stuff like that. Try to always get the next size up. That way you have a little more wiggle room. Like with Chandler, he has a vest. Some shirts are also heavy. You get an issue shirt or a heavy wool shirt. It's definitely going to add a little more fluff to your figure. So make sure, you get something that fits. So always kind of going the next size up is fine. Plus, you know, these weren't tailored. These weren't a frock coat. You'd want to get them, you know, too big, too small. It's still pretty much the same way in the military with the fatigues, you know, where your dress blues or your navy whites, you know, are a little more form-fitting because that's the dress uniform. But the sack coat, you really can't go wrong going the next size up.
Right, and like this one on me, I'm a small guy. You know, I've kind of got a build to me, but I'm a small guy. And so if I've got this fitting, there's still looseness to it. And I could probably turn this into a double-breasted jacket just with the amount I have loose. But like Captain Whitehall said, you know, this isn't your dress uniform. This is what you're going to be wearing in the field. This is what you're going to be wearing when you're doing fatigue work. And, you know, that's the impression you want to give. You know.
Definitely. Plus, with all the running and rolling around and crawling on the ground that we do, looser fitting is typically better. I've definitely have my older frocks that I started to feel a little tight in. They still fit. They were still kind of the form-fitting frock. And yeah, crawling around on the ground with those was... They have a lot of rips and tears on the inside. So for being on the skirmish line, yeah, size, fluffiness definitely helps. And you'll soon find out about that. Right. It'll be fun. Mm-hmm. But anyways, if you guys like this video, definitely give it a thumbs up. If you want to see more construction videos, plan on getting a trouser kit here coming right around Christmas time, something like that. About there. So we'll definitely be doing a how-to on sewing trousers, so definitely subscribe if you'd like to see stuff like that. Definitely check out our website. We have a lot more write-ups on the sack coat and just other overall woodworking and sharpshooter history from the Civil War. So please check out our website at 2ndusss.com, and we will see you guys in the next video.